I have to say that I'm somewhat puzzled by the episodes we heard about in today's reading from Mark's Gospel. To set these in context, Jesus is going about the area in his ministry that's either in or borders on Gentile country. Back in chapter 6, we had the account of Jesus feeding the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and having 12 baskets of crumbs left over. Then we were told about Jesus walking on water to come to the disciples in the midst of the Sea of Galilee. Then we had the confrontation we heard last week, and now today we have these 2 episodes of healing. And after this, we will hear about another feeding, this time some 4,000 using 7 loaves and ending up with 7 baskets of leftovers. So we're in the midst of many accounts of miraculous events. That leads me to wonder why Mark chose these particular episodes to give us. What was special about them that led Mark to include them and not other accounts of Jesus showing his authority over nature and over disease? And I am especially intrigued by the account of the woman from Lebanon. That's what Syrophoenician means. She was from Lebanon. The Syrophoenician woman had everything going against her when she pushed her way into Jesus' presence. She was a woman and a Gentile, which meant that she was from the wrong side of the tracks. She had no right to engage Jesus in conversation. Imagine a homeless person interrupting the dinner of the Archbishop of Canterbury to ask for a favor. Despite the dictates of custom, this woman does approach Jesus. She's driven by something more powerful than protocol. She's desperately afraid for her daughter's life. She bows before Jesus and begs him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Now, we expect Jesus to say, "Of course I will save your daughter." After all, that's how most of the accounts of healing in the various Gospels go. Mark doesn't tell us how often she came to Jesus with her request or what she said initially, but when Matthew tells us this same episode, he says that she cried out, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David." Matthew also implies that she came to Jesus at least twice and to his disciples another time. But here in Mark's account, Jesus is caught with his famous compassion down. He says to her, "Let the children be fed first. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." Jesus is telling this desperate woman that his mission is for the Jews and the Jews alone. He calls her a dog. Now, some commentaries suggest that the word dog is not as harsh as it sounds, that Jesus is merely referring to her as a pet, which to my ear sounds bad enough. But no, the word is dog, and dog is what he means. Now, many people who would suffer those words might have crept away feeling small and insignificant. But not this woman. She boldly responds, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." She's being pushy here, talking to this known healing miracle worker this way, with the life and well-being of her daughter at stake. Sermons on this text frequently spend most of their time trying to justify Jesus' grossly insulting rebuke to this nameless woman. "Let the children first be fed, for it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Well, let's consider 2 things about this temptation. First, Jesus does not really need us to defend him. And second, even if we wanted to defend Jesus, there's no way to do it. However, it is worth noting that God became incarnate not only in a person, but also in a culture. And here Jesus gives voice to 2 of the most fundamental prejudices of his culture. Jewish men did not speak to or allow themselves to be spoken to by women in public. And observant Jews tried to minimize their contact with Gentiles. I think by far the most interesting person in this account is this nameless Gentile woman who didn't mind being pushy and who cleverly turned Jesus' insult to her own advantage. There are a couple of ways of looking at her. First off, try to see her as Jesus and the disciples must have seen her. Unpleasant, annoying, impossible to get rid of. She wouldn't take no for an answer. Don't call us, we'll call you would not have satisfied her. If you put her on hold and hoped she would eventually hang up, you would have been sorely disappointed. But try and see her perhaps a little more objectively. Sometimes being pushy, aggressive, and annoying is the only way to get things done. Sometimes in hindsight, we see that pushy, aggressive, and annoying are just other words for courage, persistence, determination. And that's how I think we need to see the woman in today's gospel reading. She defied social conventions. She engaged in a prime example of crossing boundaries. Those were the boundaries of convention, of the way things are done. In Jesus' world, women were expected to be more or less invisible and silent, but in spite of any number of spoken and unspoken cultural assumptions, this woman would not be silent and persisted in seeking healing for her daughter. Human beings suffer from a deep insecurity that pushes us to create rules that give status and value to some while denigrating others. In the first century, the poor, the infirm, the orphaned, the mentally ill, the alien, and many women lived with very low status. In the 21st century, many of these people still live at the margins of society, and we are no more inclined to forgiveness, preferring long prison terms and harsh religious judgment for those who stray from our secular laws and our religious conventions. Our world teaches us to shun the dirty, smelly woman ranting on the bus next to us and not to embrace her. Countless children spend empty, abused lives shuttled from one foster home to the next, forgotten and unloved by the world. Jesus' earlier prejudice was very human, but his second response is perhaps divine. He understands her challenge. His mission is not restricted to the Jews. God's love expands beyond all barriers, and so he also crosses those boundaries that he had earlier observed. Rather than scolding her for her brashness, Jesus tells her, for saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. This episode shows Jesus in the worst possible light, so why did Mark include it? Maybe it's in the gospel to encourage us. Like the woman, we often come to Jesus with desperate needs. We're out of work and need a job. Someone we love is dying, or someone has just shattered our heart. Like this woman, we may pray to God day and night, but find no relief. But more than likely, we pray about something once or twice and then forget about it. It's difficult to explain why God hears and answers some prayers and seems to leave others unanswered, but God seems to expect us to be persistent in our prayers, maybe even a little pushy, and come back again and again. I think the final thing we should notice about this woman is the nature of her request. Begging Jesus to free her daughter from demonic power was no idle, offhand petition. The woman was not asking for a trip to Cancun or for a new car or even, as we heard last week, for a new private jet. She was seeking justice. And thank goodness for pushy women and sometimes pushy men. Thank goodness for people who defy social conventions in their quest to right wrongs. But above all, thank goodness for those who kneel at Jesus' feet and pray without ceasing. Thank goodness for women and men who seek justice and will not accept no for an answer, even when the no seems to come from God. Exploring this text is unsettling. Perhaps the directness of dialogue between Jesus and this unnamed Syrophoenician woman reminds us to name the differences and call out the hierarchies. In order to be delivered from these demons that hold our society hostage, we have to name things clearly. This is the first step in the process toward full healing and restoration. Perhaps it is too much to ask that a homeless person could interrupt the dinner of the Archbishop of Canterbury to ask a favor. But it is not too much to ask humanity to recognize that there are no walls made of withered hands, deaf ears, or troubled minds separating us from God and from each other. Status is a product of our own imaginations, invisible to God. Once we acknowledge that there are no walls separating us, love and mercy can flow unfettered, and all people are deemed equally valuable.